Your reality is made up of what you perceive and what you believe, both of which can be changed, therefore changing your reality. This conversation took place June 28th, 2025. We began talking about perception, and that's where this video begins. Like when I edit the videos every week and put them on YouTube, I might listen to them 10 times. And I often hear stuff that I didn't hear the first 3 or 4 or 5 times through, And I think that, one reason that happens is because we have a lot more going on in our mind than we can pay attention to, right? It's a little bit like this room here. Like I'm sitting here looking at the computer, but I can see the rest of the room. I can see almost 180 degrees, right? Peripheral vision, like even though I'm focused on you guys, I'm focused on the screen here. If a bird maybe were to fly, into my yard here that I can see out of the corner of my eye, that might take my attention away. So the same thing happens all the time. Like I believe one of my principles is that your inner senses and your outer senses use the same nerves. And I'm sure that that's true, even though I've never heard anybody talk about it. It seems to me self-evident, right? That if you imagine listening to a song by the Beatles or something in your imagination, that the same part of your brain, or at least a large part of the brain that is used when you actually listen to the song on the radio or on a computer or on your iPhone or something, a large part of those nerves are going to be the same. That seems to me just obvious, right? So, when a magician is doing like a card trick or something, a lot of what they do is they direct your attention somewhere else, so you don't see what they're doing, right? They'll say, okay, now look at your card. Make sure you remember your card. So you look at your card. Meanwhile, the other hand is going, and he's cutting the deck or something, right? You don't realize that because you're looking at your card. So this is true all the time. Like if I say, for example, I was talking to an old buddy from high school the other day. Well, you might start thinking of your high school for maybe a second or half a second or a quarter of a second. And if I say he just recently went blind, well, you might not hear that, you go, oh, you come back in the conversation and here I'm talking about this friend of mine from high school. But if you listen to the recording again, then you listen and you go, what? His friend went blind. I didn't hear him say that last time, So I think that happens a lot too, is that we just change our focus. And when you change your focus, you miss something, right? You're having a conversation and somebody says something across the room and, you listen over there and you don't hear what your friend is saying right next to you, right? But I got something I was going to talk about today that I don't think I've covered it before, but I'll cover it now. And I've talked about it before, but I'll talk about it again today. But it's also an example of at least a part of what I was going to say today. Part of it is an example of realizing something and not realizing that I already knew that. I was talking about last week, I mentioned these messages from Merlin, right? So when I was writing my first book, the first version of Mind, Time, and Power that I wrote, it was largely channeled, meaning I didn't really think about it consciously so much. I just kind of closed my eyes. I had a typewriter. I sort of sat down every day at the typewriter, and I just started writing, and it actually felt like it was coming from someplace else, coming from some other part of my mind, or some other, I don't know who, from what. So depending on what your belief system is, you might say, oh, well, that's your spirit guide, or that's a guardian angel, or you might say, oh, that's your unconscious, or it's your future self, something like that, depending on what your belief system is. That experience, you would describe it several different ways, right? So at any rate, I recognized when I was writing this book that I was channeling this information from somewhere, And so I asked I asked the person who was talking, at least that's what it felt like, have you got a name? And he said, yeah, my name's Merlin. And so I laughed and I said, well, that's kind of stupid. Couldn't you come up with a better name than that? But I remember he said, well, that's as good a name as any, So at any rate, over the years, I've realized, and it took me a long time to realize this, but I realized that I would get these ideas buzzing around my head. And then every once in a while, one of them would just kind of feel different, right? And so I recognized that they were coming from Merlin, which in my mind is, it's a part of my subconscious. I don't think of it as a spirit guide or anything like that, though, I understand if I'm talking to people who are particularly spiritually minded and they say, oh, I'm in touch with my spirit guide or my guardian angel or something. I can relate to that. I mean, I understand what they're talking about. Just in case you think what I'm talking about in this section of the video is unusual, listen to what one of the most famous and most beloved billionaires on the planet has to say about this process.
Do you know when you've written a hit? I mean, do you have that ability to say that's a hit?
You get a sort of funny little feeling that I think, you do a bit, but I'm hopeless at picking singles and stuff. I can write a few songs. I can never tell which one people are going to like. But you do get a little sort of funny twinge. But it's strange, I think a lot of people who talk about writing songs, you feel as though you haven't actually written it. As though it's sort of just come through you. And you're just merely the vehicle, David.
Merely the vehicle from on high.
Oh, God.
For something from on high.
Oh, no, it's true, though. It is a sort of strange feeling.
So I call these things messages from Merlin, They seem to happen often when I'm driving my car. I think it's because when you're driving your car, you have your attention focused on the road. And so your mind is sort of occupied with paying attention to your driving, and you get these ideas popping into your head, Another example of what I'm talking about is, you're talking to your friend and you say, hey, I just saw this great movie with this great actor that I really like. And your friend says, oh, who is it? And you go, geez, his name's right on the tip of my tongue, but I can't think of it, right? But I'm sure if I could show you a picture of this guy, or if I knew his name, you probably love him too, right? He's a great actor. And then 15 minutes later, you leave the coffee shop from talking to your buddy and you get in your car and you're driving home, and halfway home, boom, the guy's name pops into your head, So what is that? Well, to my mind, it's that same part of your mind, it's that Merlin part. It's like you've given yourself an instruction. Think of the name of this actor that was in this movie. And you couldn't consciously come up with it, but your mind is still working on it in the background. And then, 15 minutes later or an hour later, or maybe when you're in the shower or something, all of a sudden, oh, yeah. John Leguizamo, whatever his name might be, right? His name pops into your head. So I think it's a similar thing. When you're working on something, when you're trying to solve a problem, you're trying to find an answer to something. You you're actually talking to your mind and you're telling it, how can I solve this problem here? Maybe you don't come up with an answer, but then a couple days later, like I say, you're in the shower and all of a sudden, click, oh, hey, that's a great idea. That's a perfect idea to solve this problem about, right? So I'm assuming we've all had this sort of experience, right?
Yeah, so when that happens to me, and because I've started meditating, it made me realize that it's your mind is always racing. It's got like 30,000 things on it in the background burning away, and they're all important, and you have to decide what's important enough, like to put your mind aside. You have to put all that aside. So when I do that a lot. So I try to explain something, and then all of a sudden I can't remember the name or something. And
Yeah.
But now that I meditate, I can realize that I need more practice in doing that to be able to carry that kind of relaxation anywhere where I can just relax, like not get stressed out about remembering the name and trying to put brakes on things in the back of my mind, but just to set that aside and then it should just flow to you, right?
Yeah. Like I often say something like, I'll think of it later. I can't think of this guy's name, but I'll think of it later. And as often as not, the next day or the next hour or the next minute, all of a sudden it pops into your mind. So I got one of these messages from Merlin about a week or two ago, right? And I recorded it because that's what I do these days. I used to tell people, carry a notebook in your pocket, because when you start on this process of deciding on consciously changing your life, changing your past, changing your present, changing your future, your mind's going to start working in a little different gear. So you're going to start getting these new ideas popping into your head. So you want to make sure that you write them down, because otherwise they're gone. Earl Nightingale used to say, good ideas are like slippery fish. If you don't gaff them with the end of a pencil, they're gone. They're liable to swim away, right? So anyway, what I've been talking about for a long time is becoming the architect of your life, because I think it's a good analogy, right? We talk about manifestation all the time. We all want to manifest more things. So I think of it like being an architect. Now an architect's going to get an idea in his head, but if he writes it down and scribbles it on a piece of paper and continues to play with it, eventually he's going to end up with a complete set of plans, and eventually that can be built as a building. It might be a school or an office building or something, but it's started as an idea, just an idea in his head, right? So this idea of becoming the architect of your life, this is what I'm talking about. You get the idea that it's possible to design your life and create your life. And then the more you get into it, the more you practice it, you do it every day, even a minute or two every day. Eventually you find yourself you have a new life that you created, right? So this is what I've been talking about for a long time, is this idea that you can become the architect of your life consciously, right? And so this message from Merlin happened to be, you already are the architect of your life. In other words, everything in your life that you are experiencing right now, you created it. And if it's something that you don't want, you created it without realizing it. So the point of meditation is to go back in your mind and revisit some of those earlier decisions and realize, that's how I did it. And I can give you some examples of that if you want. I mean, we've talked about this before on these calls, but I thought this was such a neat idea, that hey, I already am the architect, rather than I want to be the architect of my future. I am the architect that created my present. And if my present is great, then I don't have to worry about it. I'll just let it continue. But if it's something I don't like, then I need to go back and figure out in my mind, how did I create this? What decision did I make? What belief did I adopt that resulted in this? So I thought that was a great idea. I hadn't thought about that before. And then I thought, wait a second. After I thought about it for a day or so, I thought, I have thought about this before. As a matter of fact, I wrote this on the first page of my book. Right? Now here I had forgotten about it. Here's the book I'm talking about, right?
Happens to you too, huh?
So here, I want to read this. Now, this is in the prologue. This is the very first page in the book, right? It says here, I've always believed each of us was born with the power to realize our dreams. As a child, whenever I read about somebody who achieved something important, I would think to myself, I could do that too if I really tried. However, over time, I found that when I really did try to achieve my goals, as often as not, my efforts resulted in disappointment and frustration. When I finally took a long, hard look at myself a number of years ago, I had to admit that many areas of my life were more like a nightmare than a dream. So I'm going to skip a little bit here. If it's really true that each of us was born with so much power, I wondered, how did my life come to contain so much of what I don't want? My search for an answer to this question lasted more than a decade. Eventually, I realized that the unwanted conditions of my life were the result of a series of unconscious choices I had been making. In other words, I had been creating the unwanted conditions of my life, but I had been doing so unconsciously. To change things around required that I first of all become aware of what these choices were, and then consciously make some new ones. So that's the first page in my book, right? That my life is the way it is because I unconsciously created it. Now I need to wake up, examine it, and shift it. And here I'd forgotten about that. So how crazy is that? I mean, because I was kind of bemoaning the fact that, there's a couple things I'm dealing with in my life right now. It's like, how in the heck did this happen? And then I got this message from Merlin saying, you did it. That's how it happened. It isn't an accident. You created it.
Snap out of it.
Slap, 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 smarten up, right? So, so this idea of having these great ideas and then forgetting them, it happens to all of us, right? Any comments?
Yeah, I use my phone often in the notes. There's a little notepad in there, and I've got like pages of ideas and things that I've been jotting down when I'm on the road, so I don't have to have a notebook on me at the time. And I got notebooks everywhere with ideas on them, and I find that the phone is really handy to have them in there because you can pull them out as a document as well. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can email them to yourself or, whatever. But this idea, that, hey, I did this to myself. I'll give you a couple of examples just for Brian's benefit, and also Michael and Greg too. Jessica one day said to me, I'm really sick of this place that I'm living in. I want to move. But somehow I just don't feel like it's the right time to move. I get an uncomfortable feeling every time I think about moving. So I want to move, and yet I don't want to move. What's that about? So I said, well, let's examine it for a minute, So I said to her, one of the things I believe is that any situation in your life that is going on now, you created it in the past you made a decision in the past that you're now bumping up against, and you forgot about that decision. So she says, "Oh, I just remembered what it was." So I said, "What was it?" She said, "When my son was about 2, I think, his dad and I separated, and I decided it was best if he stay with his dad. But I remember thinking, I need to stay close to him because he needs me. He needs his mom. So I need to stay close to him, and I don't want to move far away. So that if he needs me, he wants to see me, he can see me right away." And she said, "I totally forgot about that." So I said, "Well, how old's your son now?" And she said, "Oh, he's 26. I said, "Is it okay to move now?" She said, "Yeah." So it's that, it can be that simple, right? When you kind of ask the right question, you get the answer, and all of a sudden the light bulb goes on. So within about a month, she'd moved, found a better job, found a better place to live, and everything was fine. But this is often what happens to us, right? We want to do something, and we get this feeling in our body, "Yeah, I don't know about this, somehow it just doesn't seem right, so I'm going to wait." And so I'm assuming we've all experienced those kind of things. I got a lot of examples of different people that I could mention, but I've talked about them before. So I have something I was going to talk about today, unless somebody has a comment, a question, an urgency that they wanted to talk about.
No,
Okay.
I'm good.
There's no takers? Okay. So I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see how this goes. I get into the specifics of exactly what it takes to consciously create your reality in part 2 of this recording. Join us in this online community for $1 a day. You get your own PDF copy of the book upon which this entire training series is based. 2 powerful meditation recordings, this Design Your Life workbook, and a 4-hour video course that tells you how to use it to change your life step by step. Go to learntodesignyourlife.com.